Quiet, friends. I have a tale to tell before the tavern closes tonight. I have come a very long way and seen so many places. I've heard so many stories, and I'm happy to be here now to share them with you. So gather round. The tale I have for you tonight is one of adventure, cunning, crime, and nobility. A tale in which the trickery of a young woman made her powerful beyond her wildest dreams. Our tale opens to the south, deep in the marshland and swamps, in a nation called Morestert. The rain was falling like stars from the sky, heavily drumming on the roof of the cottage of a young girl. She was born to a smith father and a seamstress mother. Not a single coin to treat themselves, but enough work around to stay alive. They named her Marta Illgrimm, and told her name to the stars and the swaying winds and the heavy rains of the swamp. Despite their desperation, they were a happy family. The girl grew clever, always playing tricks and plotting schemes on the people of her village. She would steal loaves of bread and set tripwires on people's doorsteps. Some would call her a menace, though she preferred to be called clever. Now Marta was getting older. Her hair grew in wild curls and her hands became scarred from labor. She craved more than her sleepy town, than the shadows of the creaking trees, more than the monsters lurking in the waters, but there was little hope to escape the swamps. One day, when the monsoon had settled into a slight drizzle, a young woman came to this hamlet, with eyes that sparkled with the same mischief as Marta's own. The young woman was named Amelia, and with her she had 4 men. Simeon, the smallest but wisest of the 4. Philip, who was large and brave. Wilbur, who was hardened from years of battle. And Naravan, who above all was charming. Marta spent many days with the 5, learning of their personalities and the lives they had chosen to live. The 5 of them had deserted from the king's army, tired and dirty, underfed and uncared for. They had fled, taking only the weapons they could steal before running off into the desert. Marta had no love for the king. Pompous and lazy were words that often described him. Amelia offered for Marta to go along with her and the men she called her friends, and Marta heartily agreed. Marta never looked back as they wandered out of the village to the north, not paying a moment's regret to the life she was leaving. The 6 of them wandered the swamps for days, looking for employment on farms, in bars, or in the company of mercenaries. However, the work was scarce, and food was not easy to come by under the canopy. Days of starvation passed, when upon a hill Marta saw a small band of the king's soldiers, 30 strong, walking down the road to the west. An idea crossed her mind, one of cunning. She woke Amelia and the others and pointed out the soldiers in the distance. She explained to them that soldiers often came with cooks and coffers of crowns that they could relieve them of. The others laughed at the notion. To take on 30 men on empty bellies was something even the gods could not do. But she just smiled. She told them of her idea, and slowly their laughter became nods of understanding and agreement. After a few minutes debating the plan and tinkering with some plants that Simeon had assured them would have the intended result, they put their plot into motion. Imagine this army's surprise when in the middle of the road stood a young woman with wild hair, her hands up, demanding they stop their advance. The soldiers slowed down, eyeing her with suspicion. Then Marta spoke again. She shouted in a clear voice, "Any man who takes another step will be destroyed." For she told them that she was a powerful sorceress. They laughed, a roar of merriment from the soldiers echoing above the trees as the rain poured down upon the road, and yet she did not move. Now, as you know, she was no sorceress, just the daughter of a seamstress. But to gather plants to dye the jerkins and gowns of her town, she had to know a great deal of this land. She knew, in the swamps grows a plant with vibrant indigo petals that, when mixed with flames, erupts like a volcano, exploding into fire and poisonous gas. A soldier dismounted his steed and stepped steadily and strongly toward the seamstress's daughter, and with a nod of her head and a flick of her wrist, she signaled to Simeon to start the show. From behind the soldiers, Simeon and the others had stalked, placing packets of the indigo flowers behind their horses and carts, and when he was told, he ignited a bundle using the embers from his lantern. A panic began. The explosion dismounted many soldiers. They ran east and west. Those who remained drew their swords and leveled their polearms towards Marta, but with another flick of her wrist, another explosion shook the swamps. Soon all the soldiers had fled, leaving their carts, steeds, and packs. That night, she and her friends rejoiced, feasting on lamb and bread, laughing underneath the cypress trees. The dance lasted into the night. The feasting only ended when their bellies were full, and Simeon began to ponder what other manner of traps and tricks the swamp could teach him. Marta and Amelia watched the moon through the trees and rain clouds, and decided this would be their new lot in life, robbing the army with trickery and traps before running off into the night. And for a year it continued as such. They learned new traps and mastered new trickery, hiding in the swamps until they saw men in the service of the king. They lived as nobles hidden in the willow trees. However, the king became irritated and decided that he would place a bounty upon Marta's life, and many wandered the swamps to claim the prize on her head. One day, when stopping in a small town for supplies, the six spotted a team of bounty hunters dragging a young boy from his home. The soldiers demanded to know if the boy knew where Marta was. Upon seeing this, the six dove into action, laying traps in the tree line and waiting for Marta to make her entrance. Marta adjusted the sword on her hip as she strode down the street, stepping softly on the stones. She stood 6 steps south of the soldiers and shouted to them. She warned them that any man who should seek the sorceress of the swamp would meet an ill fate. However, the bounty men were ready for her, and an arrow flew from one of their crossbows and struck her in the leg. She fell, gasping for air as pain danced up and down the muscles of her body. She could see the men rushing towards her, blades drawn. She struggled to draw her own and shut her eyes tight. She could hear her heart drumming in her skull. She could feel stomach acid rising in her throat as terror took her breath. She prepared for the end. Then she heard a clanging. She opened her eyes to see the young boy the men had been harassing standing above her, blocking the strike with a rake. Her friends rushed from the forest, fighting tooth and nail to protect her. People stormed from their homes, armed with pans and cooking knives. After a moment, the battle had ended, and the young boy helped her to stand. She asked why he chose to help her, and he simply smiled, telling Marta that she had been willing to die for him, so he would gladly do the same. Marta and her friends stayed in the town while her leg healed, and there was no kindness spared. The people tended to her, protected her, and soon whispers spread through the town. The 6 had decided to stay. Simeon helped fortify walls around the town. Neravan helped the merchants take stock of what the town had and what it needed. Wilbur and Philip trained the townsfolk in warfare, and Amelia simply stayed beside Marta. After months of repelling the king's men, the town had begun to grow. peasants, exhausted by the king, poured into the gates. They were eager to join the sorceress of the swamp's army, and were taught the same trickery that Marta and her people had used to feed the city so well. The king had had enough, and he sent 800 men to take the city back and bring him Marta's head. When she learned of this, fear gripped her heart again. For all her cunning, she was not much of a soldier. Days passed, and the anxiety plaguing Marta only grew as the people prepared the city for siege. One night, the rain cleared, and Marta and Amelia watched the stars together. Amelia asked Marta if she had a plan, and Marta shook her head. "Not ever since we met, not once. I had hoped my cunning would guide us, not once through all our stunts, not ever had I had it trust. I had no plan, no intent for things to go as they have went, but I refuse to see your knee bent, so a letter I have sent. I will surrender." Amelia looked stunned and begged Marta to reconsider, but she simply shook her head. She refused to see her friends suffer, and the odds were truly long. If they met on the battlefield, Marta worried no trickery or trap could save them, so she resigned herself to a surrender. At least then her people could flee. A week passed, and she could see the king's men on the horizon. Simeon approached Marta and gave her a smile. He told her that it was ready. Marta smiled as well. For this to work, she would need even her own people to believe she would surrender, so that in case the plan failed, they would already be gone. She thanked Simeon for doing his best to execute her plans, and bid him goodbye. She threw on her best cloak and braided her wild hair. She walked through the swamps until she came to a clearing, and there she shouted. She shouted at the army on the hill that she was the sorceress of the swamp, and any man brave enough should step forward. Soldiers drew their swords and began to advance on her. Under the ground lay thousands of bundles of indigo flowers, and as they stepped one more step, Marta threw down her lantern, igniting a line of thread that snaked below the surface. Those who saw it say the land itself shook and shivered as the ground upturned and decimated the army. 500 men felled in a single moment. The remaining 300 stood back up and stared, shaking and petrified. Marta stared back. She had hoped the explosion would cause a rout, or at least do some more damage than it had done. Someone stepped from the camp, pulling a sword from his hip. It was the king, and in his eyes he showed no fear of her. She had no more traps remaining, no more plans for victory. She resigned herself to meet the woman of the underground, when the sound of metal slamming together echoed down the hill. Then again, then an explosion, and another, the sound of a blaze erupting in the brush behind the enemy. The sky had cleared, and Marta could see the people of her city rushing towards the enemy, placing bear traps and throwing packages of indigo flowers. A smile bridged her cheeks. They had returned for her, but her smile faded when she saw the king's eyes had never left her. He marched down the upturned field, his eyes locked upon her. The war would end if she fell, and he knew this. Amelia stepped in front of Marta and drew her sword, leveling it across her body and taking a sturdy stand. The king engaged her, but Amelia's skill with a sword was simply better. Her steel swung through the air like songbirds, and the sharpened swords slammed together in swift parries. She dropped to her knee, and in one subtle motion sent her sword through the lazy king. Months and years passed. The city grew larger. The towns who swore steel to the merciful and wise sorceress of the swamps grew every day. She had built a new kingdom, kind and fair. Other kings called her a bandit, a swindler. But any who ventured into the swamps to take her crown were beaten with the same cleverness. Simeon wandered north to study the plants of this world. Wilbur and Philippe stayed in Marta's service as soldiers. Naravan would leave, but his story was only just beginning. Marta died after 70 winters on this land, Amelia by her side. It was said her knight died not long after, her purpose fulfilled. Their kingdom still stands, and it's said that any who threaten the land of indigo flowers will still be forced to meet their fate at the hands of the sorceress of the swamp. As I have said, I have been to these lands, and still, in the capital city of Moristert, you can see hundreds and thousands of indigo flowers being grown. In the center of the city, now named Illgrimm, is a statue of Marta and Amelia, gazing off towards the sea. The army of Moristert still employ use of traps and tricks, and to this day are still seen as bandits by some. I learned this tale from an old man. He was once just a boy, defending a queen, wielding a rake. My next tale will be one of real magic. Not simple tricks, but powers beyond what most believe possible. I have a tome of tales from every nation to share with you all. I have seen many monsters, many heroes. I have learned of the magic offered by the goddess and the magic humans can conjure for themselves. I have seen warfare, and I have tales of peace, and I cannot wait to tell them all to you. Good night, and thank you.
Legends of Lorelei is a narrative fiction podcast by Livewire Multimedia Stories. The Bard is voiced by Gwen Fullman. Written by Gwen Fullman. Co-executive produced by Gwen Fullman and Elizabeth Fullman, with music by Gwen Fullman. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please consider contributing to our Patreon. If you would like updates on this project or any of our other projects, come follow us on Instagram at Livewire Multimedia, on Tumblr at Livewire Media, or subscribe to us on YouTube at Livewire Multimedia Stories. Thank you for listening.